There is a ship sitting in the port of Rotterdam right now with a giant logo painted down the side of it. A famous logo, the kind you'd recognize instantly. That logo does not belong to the person who owns the ship. The person who owns that ship might be a dentist in Athens. It might be a German savings fund. It might be a shell company registered in the Marshall Islands with one employee and one asset. And that asset is a single colossal 400-meter steel box that cost more than a private island and burns more fuel in a day than your town uses in a month. And here's the question I want to answer today. If you had $200 million, real money, wire transfer money, and you bought one of these things, what actually happens next? How do you get that money back? Where does the profit come from? Because I promise you, the answer is not, you sell space to people who want to ship sneakers. The real business is stranger than that, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand why the smartest people in shipping barely care what's inside the containers at all. Let's start with the bill. You want a container ship. Not a little coastal feeder, a real one. Let's say a conventional 15,000 TEU Neo-Panamax, the workhorse of the Asia-Europe trade. Alphaliner has pegged that ship at roughly $150 million if you order it in China, about $160 million if you order it in South Korea. Want the biggest class, the 24,000 TEU monsters? Those contracts now run well past $200 million. And if you want it to run on methanol or LNG instead of plain old fuel oil, which, spoiler, you're going to wish you did, that's another 10 to 20% on top. So call it $200 million. You sign the contract, and then you wait. Construction typically runs 2 to 4 years from signature to delivery. 2 to 4 years. Think about what happens to the world in 4 years. You are making a bet on the state of global trade almost half a decade from now. And you're making it with a $200 million chip that you cannot take off the table. Now let's say the ship shows up. It's beautiful. It's yours. What does it cost to simply exist? Here's where most people's intuition breaks. They assume the giant number is fuel, and honestly, that instinct is reasonable, because the fuel numbers are insane. A large container ship burns something like 180 to 220 tons of fuel a day at service speed. Very low sulfur fuel oil has been running around $600 to $650 a ton in 2026. Do that math. You're looking at well over $100,000 a day, every day, just to keep moving. Fueling one of these ships for a single long-haul ocean crossing can run from $500,000 to over $1.5 million. So here's the twist, and it's the first one that reframes the entire business. If you are the owner, you very often don't pay for the fuel. You don't pay for the port fees either, or the canal tolls. Because in the most common arrangement in this industry, the time charter, you're not really a shipping company. You're a landlord. You hand the keys to someone else, and they pay you a flat daily rent, and then they go burn their own money making it go. The industry splits the costs into 2 buckets. OPEX, the fixed technical stuff. Crew, insurance, technical management, spares, routine maintenance. And VOYEX, the voyage stuff. Fuel, port dues, pilotage, tugs, canal tolls, cargo handling. Under a time charter, you eat the OPEX. The charterer eats the VOYEX. And who is the charterer? It's them. The logo. Danaos, one of the biggest of these owners, charters its container ships to a client list that reads like a who's who of the industry. CMA CGM, MSC, Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, Zim, Costco, One, HMM, Yang Ming. They own the boxes. They own the customer relationships. They own the brand painted on your hull. You own the steel. They're called non-operating owners or tonnage providers. And there's a beautiful cynical logic to why the giant carriers use them. One analyst put it perfectly. No carrier wants to be stuck owning 100% of its fleet when demand collapses. You pay a premium to charter part of your tonnage precisely so that when the music stops, you can hand the ship back. Which means, and sit with this for a second, you, the owner, are the shock absorber. You are the person holding the asset when the market turns. That is the job. That is what you're being paid for. So how much are you being paid? In a hot market, one of the really big ships can command daily rates up to around $60,000 a day. In a soft market, $20,000 to $30,000. And if you're doing the arithmetic in your head, 60 grand a day, 365 days, that's $22 million a year, against a $200 million ship, you're starting to see the shape of the thing. Roughly a decade to pay it off. If nothing ever goes wrong. Nothing ever goes wrong, right? Let me show you the single most important chart in this entire industry, and I'll just describe it because the numbers do the work. There's an index called the Harpex that tracks what it costs to charter a container ship. It was set to 0,000 points at the start of 2001. In November 2009, in the wreckage of the financial crisis, it hit 275. In June 2020, in the first panic of COVID, it fell to 412. And then in February 2022, it hit an all-time high of 4,258. 275. 4,258. That's a 15-fold swing in the price of renting the exact same steel box. Same ship, same crew, same ocean. And this is the head fake at the center of the whole business, the thing that separates the people who get rich from the people who get destroyed. You do not make money in shipping by moving cargo. You make money by owning the right asset at the right moment in the cycle. Think about what those charter rates do to the value of the ship itself. A vessel is worth whatever cash it can throw off. When rates go to 4,258, everybody wants a ship, and the price of a used ship rockets. When rates go to 275, nobody wants a ship. And this is the part that sounds made up. The price floor of a cargo ship is basically the world market price for scrap steel. Plenty of ships 15 years and older trade at exactly that level. So the real game is this. Buy a 10-year-old vessel in a depression for $40 million when it's trading barely above its melt value. Charter it out. Survive. And then sell it in a boom for 80, 100, 120. The charter income keeps the lights on. The asset play is where the fortune is. Danaos, a company most people have never heard of, booked $1.8 billion in net income across 2020 to 2022. Quietly, while everyone was screaming at Maersk about freight rates. Their charters were locked in. They took none of the political heat, and they collected for years afterward. That's the whole business. Everything else, the fuel, the crew, the cranes, the boxes, is just the machinery that keeps the asset alive long enough for the cycle to turn. Which would be a lovely, simple, elegant model, except that keeping the asset alive got a lot more expensive and a lot more complicated. And I need to tell you about the bill that arrives from a country your ship never visits. Since January 1st, 2026, every gram of carbon dioxide, plus methane and nitrous oxide on any voyage touching a European port has to be matched with a purchased allowance. The phase-in is over. It's 100%. 40% in 2024, 70% in 2025. Full freight now. Run a 10,000 TEU ship on the Asia-Europe route, burning 45,000 tons of fuel a year, and at 80 euros a ton of carbon, that's a bill on the order of 7 million euros a year. Something like 250 to 300,000 euros for a single Busan to Rotterdam run. And it doesn't stop there. There's a second separate regulation, Fuel EU Maritime, which doesn't tax your carbon. It caps the carbon intensity of your fuel on a schedule that tightens every few years out to 2050. You can't buy your way out of that one with allowances. It forces the fuel mix to change, period. Suddenly that 10 to 20% premium for the methanol engine doesn't look like a luxury. It looks like the price of still having a business in 2035. And you're still not done, because there's geography. A fully laden, ultra-large container ship going through the Suez Canal pays somewhere between $700,000 and $1.2 million. For a single transit, $1 million in tolls. And your instinct is, fine, go around. Skip it. Sail around the Cape of Good Hope like the carriers have been doing since the Red Sea attacks started. Except going around Africa adds 9 to 11 days and $1.2 to $2 million in extra fuel, plus the extra charter time, plus the extra crew cost. Even with $1 million toll, the canal is usually still the cheaper route. The $1 million is not a ripoff. The $1 million is a discount. But here's the wrinkle that makes this genuinely fascinating right now, in 2026, and it's the thing every owner is watching with a knot in their stomach. The detour around Africa has been quietly saving the entire industry. Sailing around the Cape instead of through Suez requires more ships to run the same service on the same schedule, which has soaked up an estimated 2.5 million TEU of global fleet capacity that would otherwise be sitting idle. Alphaliner has described a market with charter rates holding firm, tonnage availability at historic lows, and, at one point, literally 2 unemployed container ships on the entire planet. 2. That is not a healthy market. That is a market wearing a very convincing disguise. Because underneath it, look at what's actually been ordered. The order book to fleet ratio hit 31.6%, meaning ships equal to nearly a third of the existing global fleet are on order and coming. The fleet expanded roughly 28% in capacity between 2021 and 2026, while the cargo did not grow anywhere near that fast. On Asia-Europe, utilization has slipped below 80%, the level where carriers start discounting to fill the hold. Analysts are describing a structural surplus of 10% or more on the main east-west routes, when historically a 5% surplus is enough to crater rates. So the whole thing is balanced on a knife edge. If the Red Sea calms down and everyone goes back through Suez, all those ships get their voyages shortened. All that absorbed capacity comes flooding back into a market that was already oversupplied, and the floor drops out. Alphaliner has said it plainly. A widespread return to Suez would put freight and charter rates under significant pressure and push owners to scrap older tonnage. Peace is bad for your ship. Sit with the moral weight of that for a second. That's the industry. So let's finish where every ship finishes. The economic life of a cargo ship is roughly 25 to 30 years. Structural fatigue in the hull steel, escalating maintenance to pass the mandatory 5-year class surveys, and eventually the numbers just stop working. And then your $200 million asset gets sold by the pound. Literally, it's priced in dollars per light displacement ton, the bare weight of the empty steel. In late 2025, those prices in the Indian subcontinent were running around $400 to $430 a ton, with Turkey down near $270 to $290. The ship gets driven at full speed straight up a beach at Alang, or Chattogram, or Gadani at high tide, and then hundreds of people take it apart by hand. Cables, cupboards, engine parts, everything resold into the local construction industry. That beach is the floor under your entire investment. It's the number that says, no matter how bad it gets, my ship is worth at least this. Which is exactly why, right now, ship scrapping is running at a 20-year low, because after the post-COVID boom, owners would rather keep an old ship limping along than admit the cycle is over. So, should you buy a container ship? Here's the honest summary. You are not buying a transportation business. You are buying a leveraged, illiquid, 25-year bet on the global economy with a 2 to 4 year delivery lag. A fixed cost base that runs whether or not the ship ever leaves the dock. A customer who deliberately structured the relationship so they could hand the asset back to you the moment things go wrong. A new carbon bill that grows every single year. And a residual value determined by the price of scrap steel on a beach in Gujarat. And when you get the timing right, when you buy the steel while everyone else is panicking and sell it while everyone else is euphoric, you make more money than almost any other business on earth. About 90% of everything you own crossed an ocean to reach you. The people who own the ships it crossed on are not the people whose logos you saw. They're not moving your stuff. They're timing a cycle. And now you know exactly what game they're playing. If you found this video valuable, leave a like, subscribe, and comment below which business you want me to cover next.